Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ansika. Good evening.
Oh, Ansika and Shreya. So I think not many will join. We don't know. Sir, it is live now.
What?
The things are live on YouTube. You can start.
I can start. Okay. Good evening. This is a class MPSC 5. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Riya. Thanks, Ansika. Now I think I have got Tanmaya also. Welcome. So this course is MPSC 5. This is titled State and Society in Africa. Uh, Today we'll start with Unit 8, Africa and the World Avenue, then move on to Cold War, Non-Alignment and Africa, United Nations, Peacekeeping and Africa, and Post-Cold War. So we'll try to combine. I think just to give you a backdrop and a continuation, the kind of things we have done so far in the last two classes, in the first class on 5th and then 12th of January, and today is 19th. Today is the third class. So I think basically we have tried to look at the composite picture of Africa, what the continent looks like, what are the issues involved, what is the context, what are the different actors involved, how Africa is trying to cope with different vicissitudes, different turbulence in the last 200, 300 years, even more than that. I think if I need to combine all of the things that we have covered so far from chapter 1 to 8 and onwards, I think it provides a kind of continuation and also change, both continuity and change in terms of Africa in the pre-colonial times, during colonial days, and it's also in the post-colonial phase, particularly in the 1950s onwards. Even that itself is 75 years. For example, we have seen, we'll discuss and we have discussed a little bit about how the process of globalization, privatization, liberalization since the 1990s, how it has affected Africa one way or the other, for both for good and also not so good. How Africa has coped with this change, a metamorphic change in the interconnected world, and how we see an emergence of a multilateral world order, namely the assertion of their own right in the form of global south. We never heard about it. I mean, 20 years ago, I don't think I came across this word of global south. We basically talked about north south, east west kind of things, but now I think global south is a power to reckon with. It has consolidated itself, it has also solidified itself, and no wonder in the last G20 summit that took place here in Delhi, India, the African Union got its due place, and now it is very much a part of the G20. Africa, for a long time, it has been portrayed as a dark continent, devoid of history, culture, socio-political institution, etc. And there are two debates, competing debates regarding this. Some people called it as a very dark, drab kind of thing, like sad, bad, and mad. But on the other hand, some people say that is not a correct description or a correct notion about Africa, which is a very rich cultured history. Maybe it's a non-Western history, and the Western scholars or Western academics did not pay that much attention to it. We also discussed about the ignominious slave trade of the 15th, 16th century, how it spread its wings in Africa, in North America. For example, we know in the American context how slavery was used as an institutionalized form, particularly in the southern part of US. Like if you go to places like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, etc., and then the abolition of slavery by President Abraham Lincoln, and all the laws and regulations that continued. But in some form or the other, the slavery did continue, even after official proclamation, but unofficially it did continue. And it went all the way till 1964, till we have got a civil rights movement. People like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Jesse Jackson, and many other people, they worked on it to end this process of racial segregation, racial discrimination, prejudice, etc., etc. I also discussed about scramble for Africa among the competing colonial powers, Great Britain, Germany, France, Belgium, Portuguese, many different powers. And that also had a negative effect on Africa in terms of fragmentation and decimation of the African economy. It was just like a piece of meat, everybody was trying to grab it. So that scramble for Africa really tear apart the fabric of African unity, the African cultural ethos, etc., etc. Then we see colonial onslaught by different colonial powers, as I just described, how it destroyed rich physical resources that Africa possessed in different parts, southern Africa, eastern part, northern part, central part, uh, how it destroyed societal, cultural fabric. Some people tried to assimilate, some people did not try to assimilate. Those people who co-opted with the colonial masters, they were better off, but those people who did not, they were not better off. I think that's a very typical history of the colonial powers literally everywhere in the world. Look at our own country in India. During the British colonial Raj, the so-called Jamindars, the so-called Rajas and Maharajas who co-opted or who collaborated with the colonial, the whites and the British people, they were given patronage, they were given awards, they were given land, they were given positions, titles, of some financial benefits as well. So those who did not, they were penalized in many different ways. We also discussed about how the transplantation of European ideas and institutions impacted African unity and society. So that also led to very unpredictable uncertainties in the colonial Africa. I was reading a book about 15, 20 years ago when I was in Japan. It was called the McDonaldization of global society. So how the impact of the IMF, World Bank, the different multinational companies, MNCs, how that has transformed the societies. In the process, the indigenous elements, they are just basically wiped out. And that was not good. So it takes a while to develop, to nurture, to nourish indigenous industries, indigenous cultures, indigenous elements. But the impact of the colonial imprint on those things, that really was a big challenge. We also discussed about the problems of Africa in terms of the ideas and the institutions. In some ways, it was positive. In education, you can say, like the introduction of English language, in terms of developing an educated elite in the university systems, in the education system, in the law systems, etc., just like the way you see in India. But on the downside, the vernacular languages, the indigenous languages, I think that also got affected, the indigenous cultures, because a lot of this, for example, like in India, we have a very rich tradition of the tribal culture, Adivasi cultures. You go to place like Chhattisgarh, you go to place like Jharkhand, in Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, where there is a sizable population, somewhere between 20–40% of the tribal population. So they have their own rituals, their own traditions, um, own social mores, okay? And they would like to retain that one. And I think the state should encourage them to do so. Similar things happened in Africa also in different ways, in different forms, in different shapes, whether you go to Congo or Malawi, or Liberia, or many other places. Africa was also exporting. Africa was exporting cheaply valued primary commodities, raw materials. So the colonial people, they just sucked in all those materials cheap, and in the process, it was recycled back to Africa, to different countries. And Africa ultimately, during the colonial days, it became net importer of manufactured goods, food, and ideas. So that is one of the downsides that Africa had to face during this long process of colonization. Africans exporting cheaply valued commodities, etc. The impact of external influences that also impacted the socio-economic, cultural, and many other dimensions. And what happened was, during this long phase of colonial rules, it led to acute food insecurity, severe famine because of the climatic conditions in different parts of Africa, heavy dependence on food aid, inter and intra-state wars. Inter means state to state, okay? Nigeria, Somalia, Djibouti. I mean, all these different states in all different parts. Kenya, Uganda, uh, severe famine, drought, heavy dependence on food aid, inter and intra-state units within the state also. Like in Sudan, you saw. I mean, one of the reasons why Sudan got bifurcated a couple of years ago, South Sudan and Sudan, North Sudan, is because of the tribal warfare, competing the different warlords, etc., etc. Environmental deteriorations that also took place in a very big way in many countries within the African continent. Wasteful use of natural and human resources. A lot of corruption was involved, a lot of bureaucratic wranglings, inter-wrangling was involved. Lack of sustainable development. In some ways, there were some positive aspects to tap into the resources like United Nations, even Millennium Development Goals, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but in many ways, there is also many things that remained, like literacy, like nutrition, female infanticide, on many different aspects of sustainable development. It could not achieve the desired objectives. Poor and inadequate health and education facilities. I think in one of my classes, I discussed about how the health facilities in different countries in the world, in Africa, are not up to the mark. I think I gave you some examples, even in hospitals in Delhi, how you go to some major hospitals here and you'll see many people coming from Africa. They are being airlifted through air ambulances, etc. And I have told this, asked them, I mean, why you are here? Why you are coming all the way to India? Because they say this is not only cost effective because it costs you much less, but they're also getting very good quality healthcare in our country. And they don't have that. They don't have multi-specialities. Some of the very creamy layers among the doctors and professionals, they migrated to US, to UK. So even today, although things are a bit better than 40 years ago, 60 years ago, still, I think a lot of people need and deserve more. They don't have that social security or social welfare networks to take care or to cater to all the basic healthcare needs of the people. Same thing happens with education. In education also, uh, there has been more universities, more schools, more colleges, more vocational studies, but still I think it is too little to deal with or to cope with the rising demand of the African people. So if you look at the educational standards or educational parameters, Africa in general, I think they are way too below than the rest of the world. The weak link between the post-colonial state and society, so there has been a mismatch in that respect. Contested borders, even today, there are many border issues that skirmishes between the different countries. They are highly and robustly contested. So basically, I think what we saw during the colonial period, even a long time after that also, that African continent in general, they have become victims of slavery, colonization, neocolonialism, and bad governance. What they're asking for or aspiring for is just like the rest of the country or anywhere else, to be a case or a model case of good governance. So even if I put it mildly, they need governance surplus rather than governance deficit. Africa, as we all know, is the second largest continent in the world, 30 million square kilometers, 3 times the size of Europe and Asia. So it's a very big continent. So we don't see that much attention, scholarly attention or academic attention given to Africa. Diverse landmass, climatic conditions, and demography. They have a very short coastline only on the eastern side. If you can see just Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, etc. There are many countries in Africa which are landlocked countries. Like in the morning class in India and the world, I said the unique problems that Bhutan faces, Nepal faces, because they are surrounded by other countries. They are surrounded by mountains, hilly tracts, and other countries. So they don't have any access to the sea or to the ocean. So that creates a big problem. In Africa, similarly, there are many countries, they are landlocked. On the top of that, they are very poor, and the connectivity is also very, very poor. There are also fewer major rivers. Like in our country, India, we are extremely privileged and lucky to have so many rivers in east, west, north, south, Godavari, Narmada. I mean, you go to any hostels in JNU, like I stayed in they're all named after rivers. I stayed in a hostel called Kaveri Hostel. Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Narmada, Mahanadi. So they have got many rivers. But in Africa, you have got just a handful that you can remember: Nile River, Congo River, Niger, Zambezi. So Africa needs more, but it's the nature that has created only very few rivers. So along with that, that's also another reason why Africa is in the bottom of this development index. High transportation cost, limited domestic and international traffic, not many people. I remember a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to go to South Africa to attend a BRICS conference. But when I tried to do bookings, it was a very difficult case for me. I had to go to Italy, then come to Dubai, then go to some other place. So ultimately I gave up. I did not go to South Africa, to Durham to attend that conference. So it was a very zigzag. Even today, I'm talking about this was maybe 2-3 years ago. So Africa is a very poor connectivity. You have to go to 2 or 3 countries before you connect to countries like Mali or Niger, etc., etc. Limited domestic and international traffics, not many people. I mean, I have got many friends who are from different embassies. I mean, hardly anybody applies for that except maybe very limited scale of some business transactions or very limited defense arrangements with few countries here and there. So basically, you don't see any. I mean, today if you want to go to in the morning, if you just take a stroll in Santipat, you go to embassies like Canadian High Commission or US Embassy or Singapore High Commission, some of these countries, Australia, New Zealand, etc. I've been in Japan. You see thousands of people lining up. I mean, how many people you see in trying to get a visa to go to a country like Congo or Liberia or Angola or things like that. So very limited international traffics, limited domestic ones, and also international trade. Communication also very difficult. I remember many years ago, my brother was in Libya. At that time, I was in US. So we tried to call me. So he had to call to England. Then call was transferred to Philadelphia, then Philadelphia to New York. So I mean, it was very zigzag. So if you have to wait for all day, it's almost like the old days in India, for example. I mean, you are all young, you don't remember, but I am old enough to remember that. So if you need to book a ordinary call, it will take you anywhere between 8 to 12 hours. You have to sit in the telephone booth and you will be lucky to get a connection in telephone, an ordinary call. If you make a trunk call, you have to pay 5 times more, but again, you have to wait for 2 or 3 hours to make a call to any place. And if you make a lightning call, it is like you have to pay 10 times more. Still, that will take a lot of time. So imagine the kind of situation, the communication issues today. Okay, and their mobile users are very limited. They don't have like here we have a luxury 5G, this and that. They don't have that. So that is also a big hindrance. It's a big bottleneck and big obstacles. In terms of the natural resources, certain countries in Africa, they are very lucky and privileged. For example, South Africa, it has got 90% platinum, 85% chromium, 75% manganese, 50% gold, rich fauna and flora. And there are some of the other countries like I think Uganda and Kenya, they also have a lot of resources. One of the reasons why the Indian laborers used to go to South Africa working in the gold mines, in the diamond mines in the 1860s, 1870s, and in 1880s is for the fact that Africa was very rich and fertile, particularly in certain parts of Africa, for example, like South Africa. When Gandhi wanted to practice after getting a law degree from England, he went to South Africa, as you all know, to the Natal province. But the reason why he was very upset and angry because of the discrimination, the wage disparity, how the white masters, they were treating the black people, the colored people, the Indian people who are settlers there, and the laborer class. Most of them, they had ferried from India to South Africa. Africa has gone through a couple of economic phases from in the post-colonial phase, if you look 1965 to 73, it was a rapid economic expansion, because by this time, by 1965, most of the African countries, they have become independent. And they're infused with a lot of financial aid from the World Bank, from International Monetary Fund, IMF, from UNDP, United Nations Development Programs, etc. So that phase, 8 or 10 years, is 65 to 73. You can call it like a rapid economic expansion, going upward in the trajectory. Then 73 to 80, this is a time when the African countries, they try to adjust to the oil shock and price. So what happened in 1973? In 1973, there was an Arab-Israeli war. So all the Arab countries, they ganged up together, okay? And this was a big fight in the war. Of course, Arab countries lost and Israel won. But the Arab countries, they had a trump card of their own, which is the oil. And they used oil as a weapon. And in those days, even America, they also were heavily dependent on oil. And many of the world, including India, in Southeast Asia, Japan, many countries, okay? They, like, for example, in our country, we still import about 80 to 85% oil, okay? Of course, we are doing innovations in nuclear energy, in solar energy, etc. But still, I think we get a lot of stuff from Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Emirates, many other countries. So 73 to 80, what happened was during the Arab-Israeli war, the Arabs, they used oil as a weapon. They put an oil embargo, meaning stopped shipping any oil to any countries in the world, okay? So that automatically raised the price of oil. So there was an oil shortage, there was an oil drought in the country. I remember in that time, in 1973, in the United States of America, Richard Nixon was the president. So he put a oil premium, like nobody can take more than 2 liters or 4 liters, and there is a big long lines, queues in front of any gas centers or any petroleum stations. So that affected, I mean, you can just think about it, just imagine if it can affect a rich country and industrial military complex and a huge country like America, how it would have affected individual countries within the African continent, particularly in view of limited income, limited resources, and coping with very high oil prices. So that oil shock was again a big dampener for Africa in general. Then 1980 to 85, the high world interest rate and cutbacks in external financing. The interest rate was pretty high in most of the part. So that also affected African countries. And ultimately, so if, for example, if the World Bank was paying $100 million, they had to cut down to 70 million or $50 million. So automatically everything, all the development projects that got stalled or it got curtailed significantly. Then 1986 to 1995, we have a structural adjustment program, SAP, in policy reforms, in growth in trajectory, improvement in infrastructure, etc., etc. So in some ways, there is some movement, some upward movement, but overall, I think it's still a lot of things remain to be done. Then 1995 to 99, the end of the 20th century, just at the beginning of 21st century, partly there was economic recovery, but again that was followed by the Asian financial crisis. Okay, but please remember, by this time globalization is in full swing, is in full bloom, and what affects in Malaysia or Indonesia or Singapore or in East Asia or Southeast Asia, that does have effect in other different parts, because everything is connected, everything is interdependent. It's almost like cyber. If somebody does something crazy in Colombia or Brazil, it affects you. The whole system, the whole grid, everything breaks down. So 95 to 99, this economic recovery was partly done, but it was again undone by Asian financial crisis, that was shortfall in the commodity prices, etc. Again, since 2000 onwards, 2010 or 12 onwards, there has been some movement, some recovery, but it is not that can be expected. African foreign trade, the key features and the level of exports, the high level of imports, that is still continuing. And then FDI, we see in the last 15-20 years, there is a competing major powers. They're trying for foreign direct investment between China, Japan, India, United States, even Russia, I think different countries, particularly China, I think in particular. I wrote an article many years ago in Indian Foreign Affairs Journal in Sapru House, Delhi. That is Deadline Africa, competition among Japan, China, and India. How different countries are trying to make foray into it. But China is way ahead. So China's this strategy of string of pearls and belt and road initiatives, one belt, one road, I think they give a lot of aids, but of course with strings attached in a very soft loan kind of thing. So they have got a wide arching influence in different. India is trying to also deal with it, but India has a limited resources, but still India is trying to catch up with China. If you look into bilateral arrangements, India, Kenya, India, Uganda, India, Nigeria. Recently, I think Prime Minister went to Nigeria, Prime Minister went to different countries, he went to Egypt. So individually, I think we're doing pretty okay. I was in Egypt, I told you last time, as part of the Indian delegation, and I've seen how India has invested a lot in the Suez Canal, in many development projects in petrochemical, even Indian big business houses, Ambani, Adani, Kirloskar, Jindal, etc. They have also been trying to do some meaningful business enterprise, but not to the extent that you can imagine, but still, I mean, it's in a very small dose, but still it is taking place. Japan also, they're also investing heavily in different countries in Africa under their program of ODA, which is Official Development Assistance, and also JICA. Like, for example, in India, as you can see how Japan is investing in a very selected way, like Maruti Suzuki, the collaborative arrangements, the underground metro here in Delhi, the entire subway systems, the deforestation drive, the polio eradications, the bullet train between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, which is in progress. There are many other areas also that Japan is providing. Similarly, in Africa also, for many developmental projects, they are also providing soft loans for 99 years lease, etc., to different countries in Africa. The debt problems in Africa, this is very exogenous and endogenous. Because you have to pay back. That's why I use the word neo-colonialism. I mean, you've got free from a liberal sense, in the sense in a political kind of things. But in the economic sense, again, you become indebted because you have to pay back with compound interest, okay? But unless you have got a sufficient revenue, how can you do that? I mean, if I put it in a more individual context, let us say you have a nice job and you get 1 lakh rupees, let us say, per month, okay? And you are paying EMI, monthly installment, let us say 30,000 rupees, okay? And for the rest 70,000, you are paying the house rent, taking care of the house, living expenses, okay? Let us say for some reason, the job goes away or you lose your job or something happens, okay? Then how can you pay your EMI? So the debt problem is dependent on the market situation, on the demand and supply kind of things. If that evaporates, if that dries up, that becomes a big problem. That's how most of the African countries, they have faced this issue of the debt issues. And that has recurred. So even if you pay 10, again, you have to pay extra interest. So again, so you are literally in the trap, in this so-called debt trap. In terms of multilateralism and regionalism, we saw a number of organizations in Africa. It was created with all good intention, I would say. OAU, Organization for African Unity, African Unions, etc. Arab Maghreb Union, Economic Community of Western States, Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. So there are a number of organizations. But in terms of implementation, it failed to achieve the desired result, partly because there is a lot of corruption, partly because it was lack of motivations, partly because they are not properly trained, partly because the support that they got initially, it did not continue for a long term. Okay, so these are the things that we see in Africa over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. In terms of the Cold War, non-alignment in Africa, the Cold War came to Africa so when we talk about Cold War, it was basically 1945 to 1990. When the Cold War started at the end of World War II, in 1945, when the Allied countries won and the Axis countries, Germany, Italy, and Japan, they lost. that was US dominance. US was the was the dominant power. And few years later, around 1949-50, Soviet Union also became a dominant power. And both these countries, they enjoyed exclusive nuclear monopoly. Both US and Soviet Union by 1950, both of them had got sufficient number of nuclear bombs, atomic bombs, etc. So this continued, and we saw this, during the Cold War. Why it is called cold? Cold means they did not come, these two superpowers, US and SU, United States of America, and SU, Soviet Union. They did not come face to face, but in a proxy way, in a backyard way, they tried to compete and jockey for dominance and influence. We saw that in Cuban Missile Crisis. We saw that in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, East Germany, and many other countries. In Africa, we saw in the Congo crisis, in between US and Soviet Union in 1960. We saw in Angola in 1964, again, US and Soviet Union. So both the countries, they supported with heavy arms, heavy weapons. You can call it like a proxy war. So the people on the ground, they were the militias, they were the armies of the competing factions, but they are supported on the one side by Soviet Union, on the other side by the United States. So this thing continued in many different parts, and I think that also undermined the stability and the resilience of the African countries. In the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, there is tussle among these countries. So that continued on again, off again. So that again led to kind of decline of governance and decline of democratic governance in Africa. Africa on NAM, I have discussed about that. When NAM was created, non-alignment movement, of course, our first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, he was one of the propounders of non-alignment. Non-alignment had a policy of non-alignment, meaning not aligning with any of the superpowers, neither with Soviet Union, nor with United States, nor with any other countries. We are basically standing on our own, but at the same time, we need significant amount of economic aid. That's why India received economic aid from United States, from Soviet Union, and many other countries. But we made it a point that we are a very self-respecting nation. We will not accept any aid with financial strings attached to it. So there should not be any conditions. It should be unconditional. So in spite of that, if somebody wants to help us out so that we can develop, we can grow, that is perfectly welcome. Among the early leaders in non-alignment movement, you must have heard the name of Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt. He was also one of the founding members of non-alignment movement. Nkrumah of Ghana, he was again another top leaders. Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia, Jimmy Kenyatta from Kenya, Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. So I'm just giving you some names in African continent who joined hands with Nehru and Sukarno of Indonesia to make non-alignment movement as a third important force apart from United States and Soviet Union during the Cold War. To a large extent, I think they did succeed. African contribution to NAM, we saw that in Bandung Conference. Particularly, I think one of the positive things that the Africa and India and all these leaders, Nkrumah, Nasser, Kaunda, Kenyatta, and Nyerere did was trying to have a more solidified resistance against the racial government, the white racist suprematic government in South Africa, the policy of apartheid, which is based on racial segregation. You segregate the people of South Africa according to races, white, black, color. Okay, so white people are preferred in jobs, in both informal sector, informal sectors, in everything. So everything was segregated along the racial line, which is antithetical to democratic ethos, democratic traditions. The black people, the colored people, they are discriminated at every levels in the society. And I think NAM and all these leaders, and they fought against, not only against colonization, they also fought against racial discrimination. And I think to a large extent, they got succeeded. It was the idea of non-alignment movement was against hegemony by any state, against military alliances, against Cold War, against ideological polarization, because America wanted to implant their version of capitalist ideology. And Soviet Union, they wanted to impose their brands of Stalinist or Marxist ideas or the communist ideas. But the non-alignment people asked to stay away from either one. So they were against ideological polarization. They tried to choose their own path of development, emphasizing on mutual friendship and equality, and supporting the United Nations, which was also created in 1945, and all other agencies, UNICEF, UNESCO, WHO, etc., etc. And for major restructuring of the UN. Non-alignment also, I think, should be given some credit, at least for the end of the Cold War, because this was a sustained movement. Quite a number of countries, 100 plus countries, they were part of it. So there are many other factors for the demise or the end of Cold War, but definitely the sustained resistance, the sustained and the vocal nature of non-alignment movement, I think it did play a role at the end of Cold War and end of colonialism, end of racialism. So by the end of 1950s, literally all countries in Africa were more or less independent. And I think NAM, non-alignment movement, did play a very important role. Non-alignment also took up forehand a commitment towards human rights, toward climate change, toward global warming, to AIDS crisis, pandemics, ISIS, counterterrorism, drug trafficking, human traffickings. And also they played a very positive and important role in the evolution of the new international or world order. And also like India, in the last 20, 30 years, since the end of Cold War, we have also refurbished the non-alignment movement into a new form called the strategic autonomy, which I think some of the African countries, they've also tried to do that. It is strategic autonomy in the sense it is perfectly okay for a country to have a good relation with both Mr. A and Mr. B, with country A and country B, with both Russia as well as America, with China and Japan, China and India. So in many ways, I think this is a win-win proposition for a number of African countries. As far as UN is concerned, peacekeeping in Africa, there are causes of conflict in Africa that has been going on for the last hundreds of years: war, disease, debt, hunger, exploitation, contested borders, ethnic and refugee stripes, refugees going from one country to the other one, and they have very limited and mere means to do that. Exploitation of resources, I've discussed that, and different wars, intrastate wars, interstate wars, tribal warfares, the military government taking military coup taking place every now and then. Economic and social backwardness that also was very much endemic in different parts of Africa. And United Nations, when it was created in 1945, one of the main goals was to maintain peace and security around the world, including in African continent. Africa was also involved in negotiation, in mediation, in arbitration, as part of Chapter 6 of the UN Charter. And we saw the UN peacekeeping operation forces in Congo, in Uganda, in Mali, in Angola, and very recently in South Sudan and Sudan. And UN also facilitating the end of apartheid as an institution. I mean, UN is not perfect, but I think if you look back at UN in the last 70, 75 years, I think I would still give a pass mark, or rather a high pass mark, to the United Nations, because they have done some very notable work. If there would have been no UN, I don't know, I mean, things would have probably fallen apart, things would have gone in different directions. At least UN provided a common forum and common platform to air your views, to air your grievances, okay? At least they're willing to listen. You are able to air your views, like as member of the United Nations General Assembly. Now we have got how many? 203, 206 countries in the UN. And at least each country gets one vote in the UN General Assembly. And even in the UN Security Council, there are 15 members, 5 permanent members, as you all know. United States, Russia, China, Great Britain, and France. But in the non-permanent members, every 2 years, there is a rotation. A lot of times, the different African countries, they are represented. So they do have their voice. They do express their voice. Not that everything gets implemented, but unless you become a stakeholder, your things will not go too far. You need to be a stakeholder. You need to stake out. You need to put your neck out. You need to state exactly what you want, how much you want, what are your priorities, what are your goals. You have to lay out your game plan, your roadmap, okay? And then maybe some countries in the world, they will listen to you. Maybe they will come forward. They will try to help you in whatever way they can. When we talk about these peacekeeping things, UN does three things concurrently: peacekeeping, peacemaking, and peace building. Peacekeeping means to keep peace, to put a lead, okay, wherever there is a warring factions going on, okay. Peacemaking, that is a process in the motion, and peace building, you have to build on the existing structures. That takes time. It needs very sustained diplomacy. You have to be very, very patient about it. I think in many ways, the United Nations, they try to do that. And a lot of the countries, when they got, for example, the Sudan, when people thought there is going to be a lot of bloodshed. Of course, there was a lot of killings, etc. But I think over a period of time, the UN was able to put a lead on that and provide at least some semblance of um, um, normalcy to both sides and trying to help them in the initial phases when the country got divided. Even during the post-Cold War, again, US was a big factor, okay, and they tried to take sides within the tribal groups or within the militias, okay. That also inhibited certain progress that they could have achieved. Humanitarian assistance that was given in terms of different aid to different countries. One of the issues in general the UN has faced in the last many, many years is in terms of funding. UN does have a funding, but UN has also a lot of agencies, as I said, specialized agencies: UNICEF, UNESCO, ICAO, WHO, many other organizations. So the funding has been a big issue. It is unfortunate and very sad that some of the rich countries, including United States, including Great Britain, France, the so-called G8 countries, they have not come forward. Even many countries, they have not paid their dues, very minimal dues to the UN for many, many years. Only countries like India, China, Japan, etc., they have paid their dues on time and very diligently. So I think that has also affected in the lot of operations of the in terms of the lack of funding or lack of, I would say, adequate funding by the UN. So that needs to be uh, 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 addressed, or that needs to be corrected. And the UN also played a very important role in Africa, because when this tribal warfare, interstate warfare took place, there are a lot of landmines. UN also created some laws regarding to abolish the landmine issues, okay? And also negotiating accords in Somalia, in Sierra Leone, in Angola, Rwanda, and many other things. I think if you look at UN, in some ways, I think they have taken care of some of the things regarding good governance, trying to ensure rule of law, international rule of order, strengthening democratization, promoting transparency, capacity buildings, okay? So yes, I mean, some countries, they have done that, but I think it is not equal, or it is not even in even phases, okay? Some countries, as I said, they have developed a lot more than the other countries. I think that happens in, particularly in plural societies. And Africa is, in a way, it is a plural continent, okay? So you cannot equate apples with oranges. South Africa is different, Kenya is different, Uganda is different, Congo is different, Angola is different, Malawi is different. But again, I think, I mean, in terms of equity or equitable growth, we would like to see Africa in general should move up in the ladder of development, etc., etc. In some ways it is happening, but there is still a long way to go. In terms of post-Cold War, since 1990s, again, Russia became a junior player. US was the sole superpower. United States did try to exercise its own influence in Africa. One of the, I think I would say, I would criticize the American foreign policy, at least some sections within American foreign policy establishment. They take a very narrow and parochial view of the United Nations, meaning UN is equal to US and US is equal to UN. I think that's a very dangerous description of the United Nations. Just because United Nations is located in United States of America in the city of New York, the UN headquarters, that doesn't mean that UN as a collective body, as a decision-making body, as a deliberative body, have to follow everything that the US hopes for or asks for. It's almost like, let us say, in the institution that you work, in any college, any universities, any company, or any public sector, private sectors. Let us say there is a meeting of 15 people, 10 people, 20 people, 30 people, okay? Everybody should be given their freedom, their leeways to express their views their way, okay? On even any policy matters, okay? Sometimes your voice or your argument is noted, it is being implemented, sometimes it is not, okay? So basically, at the end of the day, we arrive at certain consensus, and that consensus we follow. So there are examples when UN has adhered to the US policy, but there are also many examples where the UN has deviated a separate path, a separate track, other than the US foreign policy or US official policy, and US doesn't like it. So what they do is they take punitive actions. They punish the UN by not giving funding or withholding the money and creating problems and obstacles in different ways. I think that's a very soft-sided, I mean, that would be a very thin-skinned approach if you want to believe in a multilateral world order or in a spirit of multilateralism. For example, in 1991, okay, although nobody is supporting the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein attacking a small tiny neighbor of Kuwait, okay, not many countries, people, different countries, they wanted to give a long rope, a long leeway to Saddam Hussein to give some notices, some time, so that it will listen to the UN and again ultimately withdraw. But it didn't happen. Ultimately, US and Great Britain, they went ahead and attacked. In the 2003 Iraqi war, the Iraq war that US fought under George W. Bush, again, the UN was just like a bystander. There has been also many other examples in the United Nations when the UN Secretary General, they used to talk a lot, like in the Gaza crisis, you saw that, in Ukraine issue, you saw that, okay? So it is almost like a dog that barks but doesn't know how to bite. But UN need to be much more forceful, need to be much more stringent about these rules, okay? It should both bark and also bite, and that is not happening. Part of the reason is the constitution of the UN, the charter of the UN, where you need unanimity among the permanent members of the UN Security Council. But on most of the issues, important issues, one or the other countries, they don't agree or toe with the majority. But it has to be unanimous. All 5 countries, they need to agree on that. That is also one of the reasons why there has not been an expansion of UN Security Council in the last 75, 80 years. Okay. So whatever was done way back in 1945, depending on the power quotient or power equation in those days, because it was just fresh from World War II. Great Britain was a leading power, France was a leading power, China, at that time, Soviet Union, and United States. Okay, but today, if you look at the world in 2025, it's a different world. It's a different power configuration. Germany is very dominant. India is a dominant power, major power. Japan is a major power. Brazil, Argentina, they are major powers. Egypt, Nigeria, they are important powers. And also, you need to give regional representation. How can you exclude a big continent like Africa? Are not any countries in Africa eligible to become a member of UNSC? Why not India? I mean, why is it that only China and in the largest continent in Asia should be represented? Why not India? Why not Japan? How come there are 2 countries in Europe, which is not definitely number 1 these days, United Kingdom and France, they're members. So you can argue many ways. And which country in the world, they contributed significantly to UN peacekeeping operation? India. So if you look at all the benchmarks, all the tick marks, I think India will get a lot of marks in that one. But due to this constitutional anomaly, where all the 5 countries in the UN Security Council, the permanent members, they need to tick. And China, for example, they don't want India. China wants a monopolar Asia. It wants to be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Okay. and number one as part of the Asian bloc or Asian century. But China also wants a bipolar world. So at the global level, China wants US, China, China, US, becoming like almost like a co-leader, co-hegemon, co-dominant player, okay, trying to dictate co-competitor. But in Asia, it does not want any rivals. No Japan, no India, no other countries in the world, no South Korea, nothing. Okay, so that creates a significant problem. So that is again one of the weaknesses of UN, and also Africa has also become a victim, and we don't see any African countries coming up to claim or to at least provide some legitimacy in terms of the UN. Africa has been selectively targeted by the US. Those countries they like, they support, they provide a lot of assistance. Those countries in which the regimes they don't like, they don't try to give that much of aid. So it is basically cherry picking and also pick and choose kind of thing. So that also is another reason why there is this uneven level of development within an intra-African continent. OAU has made Organization of African Unity, they have made some tangible progress in terms of conflict management and good governance. And I think in conflict management, I think we need to remember one thing, that sometimes in a contested terrain, resolution or solution is not maybe not desirable or plausible. But I think it is important to have a appropriate management of it, particularly conflict management within competing tribes, competing elements, etc., etc. And also in terms of good governance. I think OAU has been doing, at least they have made a good start in that one. And the other part is political pluralism. And political pluralism means they have now tried to learn with that Africa is not one. It's like a thali. It is like a how should I say? It is like a salad bowl. Okay, like we use the sociological term in ethnic concept. Okay, so there are different language groups, different ethnic groups, different tribal groups. Okay, each of them have their own distinctive language, their rituals, their cultures, their different things. Okay. Uh, so the pluralism is now slowly seeping into different sections and segments of African socioeconomic levels. Okay, but still, I think in a broad spectrum, we have crisis in Africa in terms of poverty, in terms of food crisis, wide divergence within and among various African countries. That divergence is too widespread. Like in India also, I think I told you once in my other class, how there is this rich India and poor India. Like you go to places like Gujarat, Maharashtra, you go to Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, or any part of the Northeast, you can see the difference. Like Bihar for a long time, even today also, a lot of people describe it quote unquote as a Bimaru state. Okay, and although Bihar, Jharkhand, they used to have a lot more mineral resources. So put it in a very higher platitude, in a higher levels. And Africa has been a victim of this wide divergence. The debt issue I have been telling you, this debt trap, that once you fall into this debt trap, it's very difficult to wriggle out of it. The fall of rate of growth, prices of export commodities. And I can give you one more example, like the dollar rupee exchange. Like, for example, today, I think the dollar rupee, Indian rupee is like what, 86, 87 rupees per a dollar. Okay. Imagine in Africa. Okay. So dollar is a hard currency. Okay. And if you need to buy anything or import anything, okay, you need to pay 2 times, 3 times more, and they don't have that money to do that. So if you are taking away money from certain development projects, it is affecting something else. Okay, so that's, you see, there is a mismatch and there is an unevenness in that one. Africa in the new millennium, we see emergence of nationality. We see in some countries clan-based political identities, like different tribes, different clans, they're trying to solidify behind that particular clan. So we see that. A rise of armed rebel groups we saw in Sudan, in Nigeria. Intra-leadership struggle, sometimes we see, even within the same set of governments. It's a very ambitious kind of rulers coming up. Everybody would like to be the boss. Everybody tried to be the ruler. Nobody would like to be a follower. Okay. I remember in 1977, in a different way, in India, in our country, when Morarji Desai became the prime minister and Chaudhry Charan Singh was in the cabinet. Okay, and I happened to be in Connaught Place near Palika Bazaar, so I bought a issue of India Today, and it was very apt. There was a picture of Morarji Desai, Charan Singh, and Jagjeevan Ram, and below that there was a tagline: "United we fall, divided we stand." United, usually what should be the way? United we win, okay? United we fall, divided we stand. So it's not like united we stand, divided we fall. The point I'm trying to make is in the African context, in different countries, in Nigeria, in Uganda, you pick any countries, in Congo, in Sudan, even within the military junta, if one military colonel, brigadier, or general, then after a couple of months, you will see that general is being kicked out, he's being tossed out, and somebody else within the same military setup or in the military elite group, they like to grab the fields of power. Okay, they try to send the tanks, combine certain, they try to mutiny against that particular government. So what happens is this disproportionate, this turf battle, and this disproportionate ambitions within the different tribes, within different clans, everybody would like to control the limited source of power. And they try to hold on to it, they try to hang on to it with brute force. And that has also been an anathema to the overall developments and overall resilience of the African society. The intra-leadership struggles. US, China, and other external actors, they have sometimes intervened, sometimes in very benign ways, but sometimes they also have their own vested interest, basically trying to carve out Africa and trying to court them to their side and to increase their own spheres of influence. On the positive side, we saw the end of apartheid in Africa. So we have no more racial segregations. It is by multiracial states, the whites, the blacks, and the colored people, the Indian people. They're getting jobs, they're being involved. For a long time, many countries in the world, we tried to boycott South African goods, South African people, South African governmental representatives. We did not have any embassies or consulates. Things like that. Even I gave you this example the other day about South African cricket team, which is very popular, and we did not allow them to come to India, or our cricket team did not go to South Africa, but only after the officially the policy of apartheid or the racial segregation took place. I think then we only allowed South African cricket team to come to India, and it consists of white players, black players, colored players, Indian origin players. Okay. Africa, of course, you saw African Union, they're getting a rightful place. They've earned it in the G20 conference in 2023, and last year in Brazil also, the AU is taking place. So I think, again, we see this emergence of global South, as I said, in a multiplex world. I said that in my first class, how the world has changed from 1945 till today, in 2025. We started out with unipolar world, 45 to 49. Then 49 to 89 or 90, that 45 years, we have got a bipolar world, United States, Soviet Union. Then 90 onwards, again, we see a unipolar world, meaning the United States as a dominant power, as a hegemonic power, number one power, sole superpower. Then at the end of 20th century, beginning of 21st century, this century, we see again an emergence of multipolar power, multiple powers. Okay, you see Japan, you see Korea, you see Australia, you see Saudi Arabia, you see Israel, Canada, Argentina, Brazil, number of countries, and every country has their own spheres of influence, has their own military, hard power, soft power, etc. Then in the last couple of years, I think we see this multipolar world again leading to a multiplex world. And in the multiplex world, what we see is the Western dominance, the American-centered narratives are still there, but it is not predominant. It is not hegemonic. They have to coexist. They have to co-live with the assertion or the aspirations of the global south, of which Africa is a big component, Latin America is a big component, and many other poor impoverished countries are a big component. So they have to join hands in certain areas, they have to agree certain areas, they have to listen to the global south, of which AU, African Union, is a big factor in moving forward this world order. Now, the question is tomorrow, Trump too will see Donald Trump taking oath of office as the President of the United States for the second time, how he wants to reconfigure it, how he wants to view the new world orders. Is he going to allow the global south to move even more advanced, more progressive, or is he going to have a more myopic view of only MAGA, make America great again, America first policies, okay, trying to develop a more isolationist policies, pulling America out from the Paris Peace Accord, pulling America out from North Atlantic organizations, from Quad and many things. So let us see how he is going to, what is his policy agenda is, okay? I think that we'll know. So maybe by the next class on 2nd of February, when we'll meet, because next Sunday is Republic Day, we don't have any classes. So the following fourth class, I think by this time, I think we'll get at least some idea as to the Trump administration, the Trump 2 administration, how he looks into Africa, what is his advisors, his ministers, his Secretary of State, how they view Africa in the scheme of things. Because if America may not be that strong like the way it was during the Cold War, but nevertheless, America is still a very significant power to deal with, a significant power to reckon with, and also even today, if America catches cold, a lot of countries in the world they sneeze, okay, because of the overarching influence of the United States of America. Okay? So I think that's all I have to say today in this today's class. Any quick comments? Tanmaya, Sriya, Ansika, Domingo? Before we go for dinners, anything quick you have to say? Any points? Coming up, Trump, Global South, anything?
Domingos from Africa, so you'll have some.
Yes, yes. Domingo, I think you are from Mozambique, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So tell us, I mean, what is your expectation from Trump too? Is it going to be good, bad, ugly, or what?
We don't know. Let's see. But the first time when Trump became the president, it was not good for Africa.
Yeah. Let us, I think let us, I think let us not be.
Yeah. Let's see now.
Yes,
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think let us not jump the gun. Let us give this fellow benefit of doubt for a couple of weeks, maybe. Let him enjoy the political honeymoon for 100 days, okay? So by that time, I think we'll get to know at least some idea about how he tries to view the world, okay? About his way, okay? But you know what? In a very strange way, one thing I like about Trump is he's very unpredictable, and he's predictably unpredictable and unpredictably predictable. Okay, and he says what he means what he says. Okay, so okay, so he's not like a traditional kind of quote unquote a politician or things like that. Okay, he's basically a deal maker. He's basically a transactional person. You give me one pizza, I'll give you one pizza or 1.5. Okay, it's almost like that. Okay, so let us see what his policies are toward Africa, toward these multilateral organizations. Okay, so I think we'll see. I think by the time we are having classes on 2nd and 9th of Feb, so we should be getting at least some idea, and maybe we can have some discussions around that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Unless there is any other question. Yes, Tanmaya, yes.
Yeah, I agree upon the same thing, sir. I think the time is the answer which will tell us what is going to happen.
Right. And also another thing I'll tell you, I'm not talking about Trump, but in general, a lot of people in the election, in the electoral rhetorics, they say a lot of things, okay? Like even in India, I'm offering 2,100 to all women, 2,500, 3,000. It's almost like an auction kind of things, okay? But when they come to power, where the money is going to come from, okay? How you are going to fulfill all the things you promised, okay? I can promise everything. I can give everybody a Mercedes car, or a laptop or this or that, okay? But who is going to pay the money, okay? So same thing. in the electoral heat of the electoral things, I mean, that is one thing. But once you are sitting in the Oval Office, in the White House, and you look at the whole world, okay? So let us see, I mean, that's why I said to Domingos, I mean, let us give this fellow some benefit of doubt, some time to settle down, okay? And let us see, I mean, how he reacts. Then we can respond to that one as it comes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, okay, thank you very much, okay, for being here, okay? I look forward to it. Next Sunday again is Republic Day 26th. So we'll be meeting the next time after 2 weeks on 2nd of February, okay? Again, I wish you all a very good night, okay? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.